advice? You want to be where everyone else isn't. I coined that term, Doug, 20-some years ago. The last place you want to be is in there, and maybe later on the show we can get to V is aware of it, you're aware of it, but let's see, who is it? I'm sorry, in the news. What those guys? I can't think of their name right now. They wrote Yeah, thank you. Before it's news, they wrote an article based on a letter that was given to them by an insider talking about how they're going to carry out a pre-planned, in-the-making, multi-year terrorist attack and who they're going to blame it on. And so when I sent that to V, he sent me back an email, V, and I'm going to ask you to address this, because based on your high-ranking mentor who taught you what you know, and ladies and gentlemen, again, it's not, and V is a bright guy. I mean, I'm not flattering him, he is. But he can only know the insider's information because he's not in that league unless he's, number one, allowed into it or told what's going on. Same thing with me. It's not what I know. It's who I've known in the past. And once they teach you what to look for, then you can begin to see it. And God bless, Doug, your radio show, because since V and I have been on there, we've been talking to people, and every day I'll get an email saying, now I see what you were talking about. Now I see what V talking about. That means to me it's working. But V, go ahead. When I sent you that before it's news article on the Super Bowl and the planned attack from a letter, what was your first thought?
My first thought is, number one, I was very concerned about it. Number two, that this could be the actual false flag event, because if they failed at their false flag in Syria, here it comes over here. And that was my biggest concern, because they need some sort of an act. You know, and one of the things that basically my guru has showed me, my mentor, is that these men at the very top will do anything and everything to retain power. That's what this whole thing is about.
Well, and again, the power that they want to maintain, and this is something, power equals control. It's total control that they want to exercise over the people. You know, it's just like this. It's trying to teach people what's coming down the pike, and when it comes, their predetermined bias and their pet, if you will, bias will keep them from seeing the steamroller that's going ahead at 100 miles an hour. Doug, in the article that you just wrote, and I think this is a good time to bring it in concerning terrorism, because terrorism is going to, whatever the false flag is going to initiate a set of financial backlashes, plural, that is going to basically, how should I say this, facilitate the desire for more control. Remember this, when they initiate a false flag, the ultimate goal is additional control. Share with the people what you know.
Well, Steve and V, here's what I was posed a question, or somebody posed me a question here this past week about the potential for a false flag at the Olympics, and of course, people have to understand Sochi is a waypoint, a hinge point in the longer range strategic plan of Russia. What it comes out down to is this: Putin. Bandar Bush, Bandar bin Sultan visited Putin twice, once in August, once in December of 2013, saying essentially, look, you guys are going to have the Olympics in Sochi. Here's the deal. We can certainly stop, or do our best to stop, the terrorist attacks that are being threatened up there. But we'll do so only if you stop backing Assad in Syria. Give ISIS, and the name, folks, once again, don't lose track of the, that name is not coincidental, the acronym ISIS for the terrorist group in Al Anbar province. What the Saudis want, and in this case, the Saudis are actually in bed with the United States and, believe it or not, Israel, if you can imagine that geopolitical series of bedfellows. The Saudis, the Israelis, the West in general, under NATO control, want Assad out of the picture. Russia, of course, has strategic and military and economic series very important in a strategic sense for Russia. Warm water military port in Tartus. Well, as we see the run up to the Olympics, you see the talk about the Black Widows, folks. It's very difficult to penetrate the ring of security and in and out of Sochi practically on a good day. So, for crying out loud, you would think that the infiltration of any type of Black Widows or external threat from Muslim terrorists into Sochi would be readily caught. Well, at this point, how this whole thing is stacked up is Putin has been given a very good pass, if you will. Putin has got the best of both worlds. If something happens at the Olympics, he can look to the West, look to the Saudis, look to the United States, and say, you know what, Obama, you know what, the West, NATO, and all that, you folks are weak, you're indecisive, and you're slow to act against terrorist organizations. We'll take care of it. And of course, that gives them a free pass to lash out. And we have to remember, Putin's all about stage presence, calculating. He's a geopolitical master. He's playing chess while we're playing the equivalent of second-grade checkers. He's very experienced, and he would capitalize on such an event, emerging really as a John Wayne character. Now, that said, nothing. It's very possible that nothing may happen at Sochi, but Sochi nonetheless marks a hinge point. We need to take a look at what's going on after Sochi, when Putin now is unrestrained in his he's looking several moves in advance on the global chessboard. So while the next move might be in Sochi, Putin is actually playing through Sochi and looking at the next move. And the motive is, what's at stake here? And Steve, we and I have talked about this, and V, of course, it's who gets to own the next 500 or 50 to 100 years in terms of economics, in terms of the economy, energy, and such. So, military strategy, and all this, it's all up for grabs on the board. I really kind of encapsulated that. That's probably a half-hour discussion, whittled down to about 2 minutes, but that's really what's going on. So we could possibly see false flags in Sochi, or a real thing in Sochi by Putin looking the other way, sticking it to the West in that fashion, coming out looking like a hero, and in fact having us holding the bag for all of this. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, V.
No, Doug is absolutely right. There's a lot of things that I want people to understand that are hinging. There's a lot of hinge points. Putin's his position. If I were to be a betting man, and I were to say to myself, what's Vladimir thinking right now? Well, there is a full onslaught against the BRICS by the Western banking cartels. Okay, and that onslaught, folks, hinges on a few things. Number one, we have the Chinese and the Japanese situation. Putin is aware of that, and of course he's going to back China, and he's going to make sure that the Chinese will make very short work of the Japanese. But there's a wild card in this whole scenario, and how that wild card plays, and which side, at the end of the day, that wild card chooses, is really going to determine whether the banksters win or whether they lose. And that wild card is India. Now, folks, you might remember when I said a couple of programs ago, me and Steve, we were on, and we were talking about the Indian Central Bank getting their marching orders directly from the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, to limit the gold purchasing ability of their citizenry. Okay, and we went on and talked about a burgeoning black market in gold that was happening in India, where the government says, hey, you know what, we're going to have to limit your gold purchase, and now we see this massive black market that's happening, where people are literally smuggling in gold, and that gold buying hasn't ceased. It's gotten so bad that India's getting that marching order, and to the point where when they're importing about 300 metric tons of gold for that month, they're just changing their ledger a little bit and putting down even a lower number so as not to upset the gold market and, of course, not to upset the Western banksters. Now, why is India doing this? Well, it's pretty interesting. If you remember in 2007, George W. Bush went over to India, and he basically ended the sanctions. Now, I don't know if some of you knew this, but there were sanctions that were against India that lasted about 40 years. Okay, because in 1974, I believe, May the 16th, India detonated its first atomic bomb. Since then, they've been under sanctions because they violated the UN Non-Proliferation Treaty. Okay, so Bush came into 2007 and forgave them of that and got rid of all the sanctions. Oh, happy day. But we know that once you make a deal with the devil, there's always a caveat. So what was the caveat? Well, the caveat was this. We'll end those sanctions only if you and I will get involved in joint military exercises. Only if we share intelligence together. Only if you will allow me to have access to your ports, access to your waters, access to some of the resources that you have. We'll open you up a little bit more for Western investment. And sure enough, Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister of India at that time, signed off on it, thought it was a great idea. But little did he know you had to pay the piper. And what happened? Immediately the U.S. started doing joint military exercises that all of a sudden the Chinese, now folks, I don't know if you guys realize this, but India and China fought a war in 1963, okay? And that war was a pretty bad defeat for India. So India's always had, even though India's biggest trading partner is China, and even though they're together in the whole BRICS involvement, India is always a little leery of China. India's number one enemy in the region is not Pakistan, because India could wipe out Pakistan in a day. Not a problem. India's biggest enemy, its biggest rival, happens to be its own partner. So you want to talk about sleeping with the enemy. India is doing it, okay? Their rival is the Chinese. China, okay, happens to be, guess what? Funneling arms to the Pakistanis. China's also funding arms to Pakistani militants who happen to be battling the Indians in the disputed Kashmiri territory. India knows this. Now here comes the U.S., and they know this too. They know if they can splinter the India-Chinese relation, they can bring the whole Southeast Asian economic alignment against the U.S., if not slow it down, fracture it, or completely destroy it. So there's an absolute advantage there to exploit. So how do you exploit this? You see, the U.S. cannot show its face there because it's not welcome. Obama, last time I was on here, we mentioned that Obama went over to the ASEAN countries during their economic forum, and they said to go take a hike. And Obama the next day came back from his Asia trip, and everybody was wondering, hey, why did you come back so early? Because they told him to go take a hike. Get lost. You're yesterday's news. You're your old hat. We don't need you anymore. So that whole economic cooperation falls apart because the West, we in the West, America, the banksters in the U.S. and in England, they cannot afford to have a geopolitical economic realignment happening that's going to put an end to the petrodollar. Because you got to understand, every little one of those, if China succeeds and if the BRICS succeed, all those little oil fiefdoms, okay, minus Saudi Arabia, minus Jordan, okay, they're going to go and jump into the bandwagon with the BRICS, especially because they will get protection from the Russians and the Chinese. This is the larger chessboard, folks. So the U.S. can't go in there and show their face. They can't float aircraft carrier battle groups there. So how do you do it? How do you take out a country? Well, it's simple. You do it covertly. You do it through proxy. And who's the front man? Who's the mob boss that they've put in to bring this whole thing through? Well, it's none other than our faithful friend Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan. He's been given the lead to broker this new war and create the tension, folks. And if you guys remember what I said back in my January of 2013, first time I was on the Hagmans, I said Shinzo Abe is going to lead Japan into a war because all Keynesians economics either end in collapse or war, and that's where we're going to head. And look at where we are today, folks. It's
V.
Sorry?
V. I got to tell you, V. We were playing that exact episode today in the office as we got ready for this broadcast. It is absolutely amazing that you predicted, you and Steve Ron predicted exactly that. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just had to put the exclamation point on that.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. And folks, Shinzo Abe, look at the man. Okay, here's this guy who's that, you know, if you're a follower of the Hagman and Hagman broadcast, you would know that there's no such thing as left and right. It's all charade. Okay, so Shinzo Abe has been given this title of right-wing Japanese nationalist. He's been going to a Japanese war memorial where there's at least 14 buried war criminals, and every single one of those war criminals were involved in the atrocities in Nanking and various other atrocities that butchered tens of millions of Chinese that Steve talked about earlier. Those guys are buried there. So here's Abe going over there and paying their respects. That is the equivalent of Angela Merkel going to the site where the Nuremberg trials were and paying homage to the dead war criminals from Nazi Germany. You just wouldn't stand for that. But that's what Abe is doing. He's incensing the Chinese. And the Chinese are making their moves against Japan. They're going island hopping. It's not, folks, it's not just the Senkaku Dayu Islands that they're fighting over. There are smaller islands within the island chains of the South China Sea that there is a great contention between Japan, between Taiwan, Vietnam, Philippines, and North Korea. China is muscling in on that territory. So far, the U.S. has figured out, okay, we got Japan on our hands, and this past week in Davos, what did Shinzo Abe do? What did he say? He basically stood up and said, the world, in no uncertain terms, I mean, it's not, he didn't call China out, but he implied that the world has to stand up against China. So think about the Chinese. The Chinese are like, this guy's really trying to pick a fight with us. Because not only is he going and showing homage to these war criminals who slaughtered our people, but he's traveling the world, exclaiming to the world that the world needs to stand up against China, which 25% of the world's manufacturing flows through. Okay? There's the insanity at work, folks. And then, January 26th, that's, what is that? That's tomorrow? Right? And a Sunday. Shinzo Abe will be in India for Republic Day. Republic Day is a day when India marks and remembers, you know, it's war heroes, it's greatness, all this other stuff. Shinzo Abe was invited there. Okay, no one gets invited to India's Republic Day unless they're a very, very, very close ally. And folks, from Abe, in the coming weeks, the defense minister of Japan is going to be meeting with India, and they're talking about and of course the mainstream press. They're telling them, oh, we're going to do some business deal, infrastructure, trade agreements, but in the back door, it's really about we need to figure out a way to stop China. And folks, India has the only aircraft carrier in Asia. Okay, they have the only aircraft carrier in the Southeast Asia Sea. And they pretty much will be the only counter to the Chinese. So they've been doing that. Abe's also been wooing the South Koreans, as well as the Taiwanese. So you see this axis forming. India, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. All of which, if you put them together, are a pretty decent and very sizable force that can go up against China. What I mean by that is this. The Japanese have an excellent navy. They're the rival of the British. The Indians have the second best, and actually, in all reality, some would say the best air force in the world. They've actually beaten the Americans twice. The South Koreans have a very capable land force. They have one of the best battle tanks in Asia. The Taiwanese have a very capable air force as well. So when you take that together, you have a pretty sizable containment force that can try and checkmate China on behalf of the Western banksters, and the Americans don't even have to show their face there. Unless, of course, things really get out of control and really spiral out of control, and then folks are in and it's World War III. But these are the maneuverings that have been taking place. It's not by accident. And Japan's doing this because it's desperate. Its annual borrowing in order to sustain its economy is 50 trillion yen per year. They've blown that level. They've hit that limit already. So what are they going to do? They're going to print more, and there's going to be more manipulation, done into its bond market to keep its bond yields as low as possible. Now, what's also happening in the space of all this, you have immensely rising energy prices for the importation of energy. Why? Because the yen is floundering, folks. It's being printed to oblivion, and it's losing value. And you have rising food prices. So these are things that are pushing Japan to become an absolute kamikaze in the region. And what could have been settled with niceties and trade agreements and mutually economically beneficial agreements set up between China and Japan, this has been turned into a proxy war, and I fear this could be the tipping point. And we talked about the bond yields here and the market crashing over here, where the market went down 500 points in the last 2 days, a 2% correction. More is to come, but you still have to watch the Japanese bond market. If any of you gentlemen want to add anything.
Go ahead, Doug,
Steve?
and then I'll speak after you or Joe.
I just want to put a bookmark in here because we did see something, and I know this is out of context, but perhaps you gentlemen can speak on this because we've been getting so much email on this about the CNN message, China dumping all U.S. bonds. Where did that originate? What that's all about? But just to bookmark that at some for addressing at some future point. But no, I think we're looking at a situation, V. I think that you called it back on when you were first when you debuted on our program. You called it. It's coming to fruition at this point here. And will we have an answer? I guess will we know better after this weekend, or will it take a little more time beyond the end of the weekend and perhaps into Tuesday before we really understand where this is all headed with Japan?
Well, I think, hey, Doug, I'd like to address that because, again, when I was on the Sheila Zielinski show and with Pastor Langford last night, and when that came up instantly, this was Japan. Forgive me. This was the Chinese firing a shot across the bow, and I'm going to have V explain to you what this means because I don't think people get it. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a hack attack. It was a hack attack if it was truly hacked. It was a strategically placed threat in the major, communist news network to basically put the United States on notice, okay? Now, what happens, and here's what I want to turn over to V. The disconnect in America is they don't understand the mutual booing of the Japanese carry trade / yen printing. That they don't understand how important it is for the United States to use Japan as its proxy, both in taking on China, but also in supporting our finances that we basically set up through the Bank of Japan and the whole country of Japan, the yen carry trade. I don't think I have ever heard anybody except you and I talk about the ancillary debt that's out there that was created to the yen carry trade, and then with all the gold leasing and none of the nations having their gold. You see, I don't know if people understand what this means, but basically the rest of the world is going to look at the United States as, skull and bones. You better believe it. The pirates never disappeared. They all ran for politics in Washington. So I want you to, if you will, explain to people what that means when the Chinese dump everything they possess on the market. They can absorb it due to their tremendous foreign reserves. Can you paint a picture for people? Because I'm telling you, brother, it is almost impossible to get people to understand the interrelationship or the correlation between the Japanese economy, the U.S. economy, and that the Chinese have been buying our debt, and then, if you will, address all the secret deals we've given to the Chinese in order for them to continue to buy our debt.
Absolutely. You know, the failure that people don't understand how global systems are set up. You know, we often hear in Wall Street and in the financial sense over here that J.P. Morgan does the Fed's dirty work. Well, that's on a national level within a given economic sector. When you look at an international level, there are certain countries and governments that the U.S. has set up to do its dirty work. Two of those nations, especially in the Asia region, that does the dirty work for the U.S. is actually number one, Japan, and number two, South Korea. Okay. They are involved in various money laundering operations. That's both in South Korea, and I verified that through my sources, as well as Japan. Both these countries are designed to make sure that the dollar hegemony continues, especially Japan. Japan is the second largest bond market in the world. Okay, and they are so integral to the current system and the current global economy that if anything were to happen, it would cause such a systemic failure all over the United States, the Middle East, Europe, and pretty much the entire banking world. That's how critical Japan is. The way Japan goes, so do we, is the same. If Japan goes down, we go down. And this is not, we're not talking about a deflationary economic period. We're not talking about anything like that, folks. We're talking about a complete total collapse, and that's exactly where Japan is at. They are over 250% debt to GDP. It's astronomical. Okay, they're in far worse condition than Greece. They have huge inflationary problems, and when they lie to you and tell you, oh yeah, the inflation's close to 2%, everything's fine, it's really not. Energy prices are going through the roof. Food prices are going through the roof. Savings rates of the Japanese people are being depleted. That great post-World War II generation that was in Japan, Japan's baby boomers, they're either retiring or dying, or they're already dead. The younger generation in Japan is similar to the U.S. generation. They're brain dead, they're hooked on technology, they're lazy. And so this is a big, big problem Japan is having. And Japan, they do the dirty work, especially for the dollar in the Japanese yen carry trade, in the forex. They are the gopher boys. They are the sheeps for the slaughter that America will use, and in order to broker a much larger war within that region. There's no doubt about it, and that's what people fail to understand. This is not, we don't hear the word, oh, we're an interconnected global economy, but people fail to understand that somehow, so one country fails, as a country that's as big as Japan economically fails, that it somehow doesn't affect us. Folks, we're all globally interconnected. So if Japan fails, we fail. Now, the whole thing with the Chinese, I quickly heard from news sources trying to cover things up, saying, "Oh, that was probably the free Syrian army." Let me tell you, the Free Syrian Army has no interest in posting a story saying that the Chinese dumped the entire U.S. Treasury bond market, the entire U.S. bonds onto the market. They have no interest in doing that. What this was is definitely a clear warning shot from China. Folks, you have been hearing the warnings from the Chinese for a while. Prepare for war with the U.S. You've heard one of their top admirals. Prepare for war with the U.S. You've heard one of their top generals talk about it. They've given you news clips showing you West Coast cities being nuked, military targets being nuked on a TV screen on their own national